welcome to our first episode of Match Play presented by Champions Round. I'm your host, Stephie Smalls, finally joined by my co-host, Spencer Aguiar. We had some technical difficulties getting on, so our logo looks a little funky right now, but that's okay. We're here. How are you doing, Spence?
I'm doing well. Nobody ever said it was going to be easy for our first show here. So I'm excited to do this with you, Stephie. Like, before we even get started, I want to thank Champions Round for this opportunity to do a show on their platform. You know, I think we've talked about this a million times, but I've been a massive fan of Jason Gold, the CCO of the company, for the past year since I met him. We spent about 20 minutes of our initial 2-hour conversation discussing why he's probably the most underrated person in the space. I'm sure you agree with that.
Yes, absolutely. 100%. You as well are probably one of them between the two of you.
Well, I appreciate that. I also want to thank Carter Russ and Chase Payne. I had the pleasure of meeting both of them at the FSGA convention in Vegas a few weeks ago. They're great guys that are leading the Champions Round team to the moon. I appreciate them trusting the vision of Jason, you and I on this project. And then last but not least, I also want to thank you, Stephie. I have wanted to do a structure like this show since I started doing podcasts a little over 2 years ago. This design setup has the potential to appeal to both lifelong bettors or someone new to the sport of golf because it's going to be different, it's going to be informative, and most of all, it's going to be fun and lively. You know, the pod naturally sells itself because of the differences we can highlight down to the gender between us, but I think people would be surprised how similar we are in various aspects. I hope that connection between us is what everyone falls in love with while watching the show. And I could not be more excited to see where we take this together.
Yes, I'm so excited. I have always wanted to do this. I think that you get the best of both worlds between the two of us. Keep things light, keep things a little bit laid back. You know, we're also on a Wednesday, so we're not going to be diving super deep into a lot of the course breakdowns. But of course, we will get to that because it's going to be part of this show. But I'm very excited to see where we can go with this. It's going to be a blast. Hopefully we get the screen sorted out and the time sorted out. But once we get started, I'm just so pumped and I can't wait to go through this with you. We'll try not to turn it into a Jason Day podcast. This week, it might go down that road. There might be a lot of Jason Day talk.
They should have never given me a show on the week that Jason Day is getting back into the winner's circle. I don't know if there's a worse episode that we could have picked for this.
So do we just start out with, is Jason Day winning the Players?
So I guess let's start here because I think it's an interesting conversation to have just in general when we talk about this tournament. Let's start with not talking about Jason Day, and then we'll go from there in a second because I think it leads into Jason Day and why he probably still has value on his numbers. So we talked about Jason. He's going to probably be out there cringing somewhere when I go down this route, but I did all 4 majors with him last year on his Gambling with Gold podcast. I started the Masters by telling him Patrick Cantlay was going to win. Obviously, he didn't. I said during the following 3 majors that Cantlay would win. He flirted with top 10s, but unfortunately, you need the winner to cash those tickets when we're talking about outright bets and things of that nature. Now, the problem with Cantlay, and we can talk about him later in the show, I think the value's probably gone with his number where things sit right now. It was much more conducive at 25-1 versus the 16-1s that are out there in the space. I think Cantlay and Thomas are probably the 2 players that, from an in-tournament betting perspective, I have the most intrigue on. But when I started my card this week, and, you know, a lot of it is shtick with me, like, believe it or not, for everybody listening, I don't actually bet Jason Day every week. I might make the joke that I am, and I think people think that I'm always on him. I feel like I'm reasonable with the expectation of what to expect with him, but he was the very first ticket that I punched this week at 36-1. My model thought sub 20-1 was proper, which that is outrageous. I understand that, but what that really means is any number that you can find out there in this space is going to be proper there. And this is the most bullish I've been on him in years of running my model. He ranks 2nd overall, first when talking about that same primary output of running it just only using the 2023 statistics. And I think from a win equity standpoint, he does move in reverse when we run this from a 2-year perspective. But when we talk about this from just 2023, which when we look at Jason Day in particular, he is a golfer that was number 1 in the world. He was a golfer who won majors. He won the Players Championship back in the day. I know if anybody can get back to that point, Jason Day is a golfer who has shown he has in the past. So I am more willing to use the short-term data I have on him and just kind of admit in my own head that he's back here. So I think Jason Day has a legitimate chance to win this tournament. That's obviously a long answer to get there, but Day is one of my favorite players in the world, which everybody knows, and he's one of my favorite bets for this tournament.
Yes. And so my shtick about Scotty Scheffler, I do bet him every week. That is something that is consistent with me. I'll use his boost on him, and I'm sure we'll talk about him a little bit later. But I think to your point, Jason Day has just been so consistent, and it's a consistency we haven't seen out of him in quite some time. I have him outright this tournament. I also think that, top 20 at plus 135, if you want to flirt with Jason Day at somewhere on your card, I think that's a nice happy medium if you're not going to go all the way to take him outright. But let's go back to just the course in general. Like this course, everyone jokes this is where chalk goes to die.
Yeah.
What is your take on this course just overall?
So I'll try to explain this as simplified as possible because I do think this is important. And I will use, we have a lot of people I'm sure out there listening that this might be their first time listening to a golf podcast. So I want to explain this a little bit differently than I normally would. If we look at football, imagine a team going from your natural Bermuda grass, which funny enough is what this surface at Sawgrass is before it becomes dormant and unplayable in the colder months, to an artificial synthetic turf. Now, the same ramifications don't come into play since artificial turf is going to be much tougher on the joints in football. Here we get an overseeding. It's going to provide more of a contextual change than something that affects the explosion of a golfer's swing, for example. However, all of that does impact how the course plays. So when this tournament used to take place in May, it gave us a Bermuda surface that was still dormant, like I was talking about, but playable from the winter. And it created this fiery test that made stopping your irons on these smaller than average greens nearly impossible. I think this is where the change really that we need to talk about comes into play here. When we put this into March and now we have overseeding on the property, it allows shot shaping. It allows the greens, everything is going to be softer. We can make an argument that maybe distance needs to be taken into account because balls aren't going to get the rollout that they used to experience. But I'm not so sure that the, quote unquote volatility, and this is where chalk goes to die. It's going to happen. It's golf. You're going to always have these ebbs and flows that come into play. But I do think at the end of the day, there may be a little bit more sustainability, and it's going to come from the golfers that, one, have good iron play. I'm definitely that's a crucial statistic. And then two, which is what makes me like Jason Day this week, it's that scrambling factor. It's the golfers that can scramble around the green, can scramble out of the rough, that have the short games that can salvage par in these situations. There's 17 holes that have water that come into play. There's 80 plus bunkers at this tournament. You're going to have to be able to maneuver your way in and out of this course to find success. And I do think the switch to March is probably more, I don't want to say, I guess beneficial would be the word for some of the better players because there's still going to be that volatility, but I'm hoping that there's going to be a little bit more of that predicted nature that comes in.
Yeah, and I think part of the volatility too has come from the weather. We saw what happened last year. It was an absolute disaster. They were up against weather the entire time. This year, the weather actually looks, knock on wood, not too bad. I don't think it's going to be the same thing that we saw last year by any means. And I think that takes away a little bit of that, unpredictability as well, outside of just the factors that you were saying before. But saying all that, were there any additional instant clicks that you made outside of Jason Day after you did your model and you went through numbers, or even before that you were like, I'm betting this guy this tournament?
Yeah, I guess I'll keep it on the outright part of this. I took Siwoo Kim at 80-1 when that number first came out. That has dropped a little bit into the 60-1 range since there. To me, that kind of shows that I'm on the right side of the equation with it. Not that movement is always what you look for. And a lot of times you end up chasing the bad end of the number when that takes place. But Siwoo's another player that, whether we look at Justin Thomas, Jason Day, Siwoo Kim, these are all golfers that have won this tournament before. And when we talk about the unpredictability of this course, it's kind of done in this up and down nature. So somebody will go from missing the cut to posting a top 10. And then the next year they'll miss the cut and then they'll win again. That's why I think there's actually the steady nature at this course that we can look into. And Siwoo Kim has a lot of that, obviously a former champion here like Dan Thomas. The one difference between him and those two players in particular is he's a golfer that can be further down the board. I don't think this is one of those spots where the 2023 metrics are too dissimilar to his 2-year running data. to me, that implies the recent run and his victory at the Sony Open aren't the only reasons he's graded as an intriguing choice. So he was top 10 in my model. That's really noteworthy for me because with the way I run my model, it's pretty standard to what you would expect on the market board, whether that be like DraftKings pricing or outright bets. So when I get these random differences from my model to what the market is telling me is accurate, which Siwoo Kim would be the prime example of that, that's a very noteworthy move for me. And there's a lot of players we can talk about. And I know one of the golfers that you like this week is Tom Hoge. And he was another player. I didn't get there on an outright ticket. I do have a top 40 bet on him at plus 140 that I punched. I know you were intrigued with him for a first round leader bet, but do you want to talk about Tom Hoge a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. And I think Tom Hoge is also one of those guys that I do feel like when he's on, he can win any tournament. I really feel strongly. I love Tom Hoge as a player. I think he gets looked past way too much. I think I took him as, I think I did top 30 with him. I could be mistaken, but I think first round leader too. He is a player that does gain a lot of momentum at the beginning of tournaments. And then, you see him kind of taper off Saturday, Sunday. But one of the players, and I try usually I consume a lot of your content. And I was like, we're doing this show. I want to save a little bit of it for just the dialogue between us that we can have. And, I tweeted this actually before we went on the show because someone told me that, you realize you can't bet Max Homa every week. And I feel like I can with the way that he is playing. I feel that I absolutely can. No player gained more strokes between driving and approach at Bay Hill than Max Homa. If he didn't putt like shit, quite frankly, he probably could have won. It was a horrible putting performance from him. His last 5 starts, he has a first, a second, and a T3. I really like Homa, and I think for the way that he's playing, which he's playing like a top golfer in the world, I think these odds are great. They've come down a little bit from where they opened up, but interested to see how you feel about Max Homa. I know he's also like one of these beloved darling players because he's very likable, but at the end of the day, he's playing very good golf.
So let me talk about Hoge and Homa in the same sense with this, because you talked about there not being a weather edge here, or not as much of a weather edge or a disadvantage for players. There is an interesting thing that I've seen come up over the last, let's say 12 hours or so. The afternoon and morning wave. So that would be Thursday afternoon, Friday morning. There does seem to be a slight advantage for those players because Friday is supposed to get blustery. And Homa and Hoge are two golfers that fall on that correct end of the spectrum of what we're looking for. So, I mean, if we're looking in that sense, sure, I think Homa draws the right end of the draw. And maybe it's a half stroke difference. I don't think it's going to be something massive there, but a half stroke plays into it's golf. Golf tournaments are won by a shot here and there. It's one stroke that decides these things. But I guess for me, and I think you said it best, where he's one of the darlings of the tour. Everybody wants to bet him. I agree with you. In theory, he's a top 10 player in the world. I don't think that's arguable at this point. The versions that we saw of him in 2022 or before, that's not what to expect from him in 2023. He's a legitimate top 10 player. The metrics in my model dictate him being a top 10 player. Now, the problem I have goes back to that putting that you just talked about. He's 117th in my model when looking at fast screens, which is what we get at TPC Sawgrass here. So I'm a little bit afraid that we're going to run into that same problem that you just talked about, to where maybe the putter goes south. And this is a volatile course. If he finds the water all of a sudden and he's not making putts, this has a chance to go in the wrong direction. Like if I just was to read off the stats of where I have him, he's 16th overall in my model, which is as low as he has been in 4 or 5 months. Like he's usually a top 5 or 10 player. When I run this for only 2023 statistics, he jumped into the top 10. But even for me, like the 9th golfer in this field is probably not value for what I would want it to be, just because, I mean, what are we looking at here? He's the 6th player, give or take, in odds on the board. So like it's a little bit negative trajectory in that sense. But look, Max Homa is a top 10 player in the world. I think that guys like that who get hot, they're able to keep it going. We saw that with Scotty Scheffler last year. We've seen that historically with any player that you want to mention. I will not be on him, but I can understand where you're going with it.
Yeah. So speaking of putting, someone that could not have putted worse this past weekend is Mr. Jordan Spieth, who essentially could have ran away with that tournament, and his putting was absolutely atrocious. How is he rating out for you? I think with Jordan Spieth, where I struggle is, you're starting to see these numbers that you would have not seen last year in him 41-1. These are not odds that we're used to for Jordan Spieth, but I think, while everything else looks pretty good, the putting has not been there. So where is he in your model, and how are you feeling about Spieth moving into, the Players?
I think Spieth is one of those boom or bust commodities. Like,
Yes.
That's essentially how he grades for me. And that goes without saying. We kind of get that with him in general. He drew the right end of the draw if we want to find another positive for him. 32nd in my model is not exactly where you want to see it. He's 20th when I ran this for upside, but there were a couple names when I run my model, and a lot of this is done from a DFS perspective, I will have it set to where it essentially gives a green, yellow, red code on them. So it compares my rank to the player to the price on DraftKings, which is obviously a little bit different than an outright discussion here. I think Spieth's outright is probably the best way to discuss this, just because he does have win equity and he could pop at some point. But I'm going to use the DFS discussion here just because it's the easy way of how I use it in my model. So it compares it against the DraftKings price. It compares it against ownership, and it takes all of that and it labels the player somewhere between dark green, if it's a really good play, to red. There are a couple players for me that showed up bright red. Jordan Spieth would be one of them.
Okay.
I think Tyrrell Hatton is a very popular play this week. I understand where people are going. To me, he's safe. But I don't necessarily want safe unless I'm talking about cash games or head-to-head bets or something inside the placement market. So if we're talking about actually winning this tournament, I'm going to be out on Hatton. I'm probably, unfortunately, going to be out on Spieth, even if he does have positive trajectory. And there's a couple other players, Finau, Morikawa. Those were guys that just for whatever reason, my model was a little bit lower on this week.
It seems like universally everyone's pretty low on Finau, and even myself as someone who does frequently bet Finau, I couldn't get there with him this week. I wish I had him somewhere on my card. I just can't do it. But let's look at the top of the board right now. It's kind of what you expect, right? We've got Rory, Scheffler, Rahm. Talk to me about Scheffler. Am I crazy to think that I just think on any given week, he's someone that can win. I think that, he's gained over 7 strokes against the field team in his last 5 starts. He's a great ball striker. Yeah. I use my FanDuel boost on him because, again, you're not getting a lot of value there, but I don't want to be out on the week that he ends up winning.
So I'm going to ask you a question after I answer that, because I think it's interesting to try to power rank these 3 players. I am in on Scottie Scheffler. I will keep that very simple with it. I think for all the reasons that you mentioned, it's one of those situations where I don't want to look too much into the past course history with Scheffler. When we look at the results that he's provided, 55th in 2022, miscut in 2021, he is not the same golfer. It's the same answer that I would give for Homa. These are different players at this part of their career. I understand Scheffler reached this tournament last year kind of when he started becoming himself, but he still wasn't quite the Scottie Scheffler that then went on to win the Masters and the match play and all the things that followed it. So a lot of confidence was gained from that. I will be playing Scottie Scheffler in DFS. I think that's a very simple way to play. You got a boost on him, which is an intriguing thing to bump up that number a little bit. My model thinks he should be technically, I'll give you the exact number here. I got him at 11.5 as being proper. I don't know what you got him at.
I got him at 12.50.
So, so you got a little bit of value based off of that number, but I would like to hear how you power rank those 3, and then I'll give my answer after you.
Yeah, it's difficult. So, and everyone knows I struggle with Rahm because I think on any given Sunday, he can throw a little tantrum and lose his cool and kind of lose that momentum that he had. He didn't necessarily throw a tantrum last weekend, but you saw him, you thought he was going to end up winning this thing and then totally fell off there. I probably would have Scottie ahead of both of these guys. And then I think, probably Rahm because of form, and then Rory followed. I don't love that. I think, again, you look at these guys, and I think you could make a case for any of them to win this tournament. So it's hard for me to rank any of them. I think Scottie, for me, is the clear first, and then the other 2, it probably depends. You could flip a coin.
At the end of the day, it's a really tough question because none of them, it's not one of those situations where somebody doesn't belong. They are all top, the markets are telling you they're top 3 win equity players, each one of them. My model might be a little bit different on that. I find some spots where I'm lower on Rahm, kind of for the reasons that you just mentioned there. It's a weird spot. It's the same answer that I'd give for Hatton, to go back to him. you add these courses where volatility can come into play. I don't know anybody who's more volatile on the golf course than Rahm and Hatton that can all of a sudden just implode. And that could be a situation where, and we've seen it before at the Players Championship, Rahm is winning the golf tournament and then all of a sudden makes a play that he shouldn't make and implodes himself off the course. Right. I mean, that happened the year that Rory won it. So if I was to power rank them, I think it is very close between Scheffler and Rory. I guess, gun to my head in this situation, I would also take Scheffler first, just because I was a little bit worried what I saw with Rory last week. I know he almost won that golf tournament, but from a statistical perspective, it continued to not like what he was doing. And there's so much water in play that you at least have to be aware of that. And then the second factor, which is the same thing that I talked about with Homa, the putting on fast screens isn't necessarily what you would want to see. So I guess I would rank it Scotty 1, Rory 2, Rahm 3, but pretty much through any iteration of how I ran my model. And we're talking about top 5 golfers at the bare minimum here. So if we're talking about this from a DFS perspective, I think it comes down to ownership. If we're talking about this from a betting perspective, I am probably not going to get there just because it's such a volatile tournament. And I would rather take my shots down the board and maybe add somebody live. Like, to me, Scotty is a play that I'm very intrigued on to see, like, if after day 1 or even after day 2, he is 40-1 to win this golf tournament, it might be an intriguing spot to try to grab him there.
Absolutely. And I think I struggle to just betting the top of the board here because, you know, you're not getting a lot of value. And yes, any of, like, again, these guys could win. It's really hard to rank them as we just tried to, and it's not easy.
It's nearly impossible. Yeah.
Nearly impossible to do that. So I think live betting these guys, like, if you want to wait and find the value, because again, you could see Scotty, maybe he's, you know, in like tied for 20 going into Saturday, and then he ends up winning the tournament. Like, that would not shock me if you find better odds later on. Another guy that is coming up a lot this week, well, there's 2 guys. We can talk about one of the darlings first, is Tom Kim, who everyone adores. I think he's 40-1 right now. You know, you're at a course where distance doesn't matter as much. The accuracy is going to be very important. It seems like a solid course fit. It plays a little bit shorter. You know, how are you feeling about Tom Kim? Because I don't feel great about Tom Kim.
Tom Kim is one of those unknown commodities. Yeah. Like, we don't know what he is at this. He's 21 years old. Like, that's what it comes down to here, is he's going to get better as time goes on. So whatever version we have of him right now, we're going to see him improve over time. I guess my biggest concern from him, so he's 13th overall in my model. He's 8th when I ran this for upside. The safety kind of takes a nosedive. And really the reason for that is this is his first time taking on this course. I do think that at the end of the day, at least playing the course, I don't care if you've missed the cut, but at least playing the course would be something nice to see. Because, you know, we've seen Siwoo Kim in the past come out and just blaze this course very early in his career. And maybe Tom Kim can take a similar trajectory with that. But, you know, it's a good setup. I'd like to think that in a couple years, like if we look 5 years down the road, if Tom Kim is the favorite to win this event, I would not be shocked. I just don't know if at this moment of his career right now, he is ready to win this event. And this is kind of going against my numbers because from a metric standpoint, my numbers do like him. I just think from a unknown sense, it almost works against him at this venue.
Yeah, I am with you on that. I think the other name that's coming up a lot, and we can kind of go through a couple of these odds, smash or pass. And it's interesting, like, I'm in on some of these guys in DFS far more than I'm in on them to bet them outright. So why don't we run through a couple of these? You know, Jon Rahm 11-1. Is that something that you're interested in for DFS, or would you rather bet that outright?
I am probably out no matter how we talk about Jon Rahm. So if we talk about it from a DFS perspective, I think he is far too expensive for a volatile course like this. And the ownership is much higher than I was anticipating it being. So, you know, it's one of those things, like I always make this comment. If you look at ownership, if you're trying to create leverage, if somebody is too expensive, that can be okay. Like, I would have rather Jason Day, instead of being $8,000, I would have rather him been $9,900 because then everybody would have had to have made a decision. Unfortunately, at $8,000, everybody plays him. I think when we look at Jon Rahm, it's one of those things. I had no interest of playing him before the week started. I thought I was going to be fully out on him. And then they released his price that was 11,800, which is to me too expensive. But unfortunately, on the flip side of that, the ownership never got reduced. Like, I'm still seeing 18%. I would rather save money with Rory and Scheffler and then also get a similar ownership play there. So, I mean, for that reason, I'm just out on Rahm across the board. And if he beats me, which he very well could, I will tip my cap to him.
Yes, of course. And it's always so frustrating because it's always the weeks I bet Rahm, I never have him. I mean, he doesn't win. And then when I don't have him, he wins. So very frustrating. The next guy, I can't get there, and I think I'm going to regret it. And I'm starting to get a little FOMO that he's not involved. So maybe I will play him a little bit in DFS, which he's picking up a lot of steam now at 16-1 is Patrick Cantlay. I am passing on him, but I'd love to hear how you feel. And again, like, this is why I purposely didn't consume your content this week, because I wanted to hear your organic thoughts on this.
I am passing on Patrick Cantlay at the 16-1 number.
Yes.
I am fully smashing, trying to find him as an in-tournament ad at some point during this week, even if it means that if it comes on Saturday night with him 1 or 2 shots off the lead and I'm grabbing him at 5 or 6-1 or whatever the number ends up being. I am not going to play him at the number that he currently is. I think there's better opportunities. I think one of the intriguing ways to try to get exposure to him early would be as a first round leader at 35-1. You kind of get the best of both worlds there, to where if he starts hot, hopefully he's the first round leader, and then, you can make some money that way with it. The DFS answer is intriguing because he has missed 3 cuts in a row. And I was not anticipating people going this wild with him in ownership. He is, for me right now, the 4th highest owned player on the board. I never saw a world where that was going to be the case. And that's a little jarring. I am probably going to play him for DFS, and I'm going to eat the chalk here, which you could make an argument that you don't want to be eating 20% chalk with a player that's missed 3 straight cuts in a tournament that's extremely volatile year after year with it. But I love the upside that he has. It's kind of like the answer that I gave at the beginning of this. To me, Cantlay has some of the best win equity of this entire tournament. And technically, the 16-1 number isn't that far off of what I think is proper. It's just, I would rather make sure he doesn't blow himself off the course first. And if it means that I bet this to win 5 units on an outright rather than win 8 units or whatever the number is, there's ways to get invested without having to jump in and then leave myself no room to maneuver after the event starts.
Yeah, I'm with you completely on this. And this question here, what are your thoughts on Sam Burns in DFS? He actually is one of the guys that I was going to bring up, because another guy that I'm starting to see a lot of people talk about here. He's 90-1 as far as checking prior to this show. I'll let you take it from the DFS standpoint, and we'll talk about him a little bit more. It's tempting at 90-1. I will not lie to you. I was tempted. I almost did it today. I will not lie. But Sam Burns has just not been consistent enough for me. And on a course like this, he scares the shit out of me.
It goes back to what I was saying too. The moniker of him is Bermuda Burns. And this is not a Bermuda course. I think that's the one thing that's kind of gets lost in translation here a little bit, is you see it listed as Bermuda grass, but the overseeding of it makes it anything but that. So if you're betting this or playing him on DFS solely because of the Bermuda reason there, I would think again on the strategy, just if that's the only case in point that you're making. Now, I think that it kind of goes into the same exact trajectory that we were talking about with Jordan Spieth, just in a little bit different way. Burns puts in right in the middle. He is yellow for my grade of this. He's playable because of the upside that he presents. I don't really know what the floor is, but if we're talking MME contests, your big millionaire makers and things with 100,000 people in it, I do think he's an interesting play to try to create leverage to the field and get contrarian. I think you just have to realize that through all the concerns, whether it be health related or play wise, there's a downside that he's going to miss the cut here. And I guess the same answer I would give to that is with Hideki Matsuyama, who I actually bet at 90-1, and I pulled the trigger there. And he probably has massive miscut equity in this event. It's probably much more likely that happens. But, he's another golfer to me to where if you just want to play it safe and you want nothing to do with him, I understand that. If you want to bet him to miss the cut, go for it. There's a bunch of that equity that is going to come into play. But I think a first round leader bet at 75-1 is intriguing. People forget he was the first round leader here on the tournament that got canceled because of COVID after day one. And he blitzed this course to start. So he's clearly shown in the past that he is capable of doing it here. I don't know if I trust him over 4 days because of the injury concerns, but it's kind of the same answer I would give a little bit to Burns there. Like, they're really good upside plays. If you're playing showdown, they could be the type of player that wins you a round 1 or round 2 showdown contest. They're also the player that could go out and they're 8 over par after the first day and they're out of the tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm like 100% with you on that. And I think another guy, and this is what happens as the week, you move on with the week, and this is when my card starts getting bigger because I'm like, oh, I have FOMO on this player. I don't want him to win. And this guy specifically, like, I have been betting him for a very long time. And if Victor Hovland were to win this tournament and I did not have him on my card, I would be heartbroken. He, again, another guy last weekend, we saw the way that tournament ended up going, but he had every opportunity to potentially really win that tournament. He was in there until he put the ball in the water on 16. But regardless of that, he had a really good week striking the ball, gaining 6.3 strokes off the tee, which, that's the most he's ever gained in a tournament in his career. So Hovland's kind of starting to put things together. So, I personally am in on Hovland. I don't know that I will get there with DFS. You're the DFS guy, so you probably are opposite of me as far as that goes. But, last year at the Players too, you saw him, he led the field in ball striking, but then you go back to how people will miss the cut and then they're in it. And then, so is there something to that? Where are you on Hovland?
It's funny you say that, Stephie. I come from a betting background completely with it. And funny enough, when I won Writer of the Year, I submitted all my betting work to win it that year. I didn't actually submit any of the DFS stuff with it. So I kind of follow it the same way as you, that I approach things first and foremost from a betting perspective. Now, obviously, I have my model to where I can go to the DFS side of the equation. From there, we can talk about Hovland's ownership in a second for DFS. But I think when we're talking about this tournament and trying to figure out who's going to win, it would be, I've already mentioned Cantlay and Thomas. I think Hovland would be that third name that I am very interested to see. I considered him pre-event. I might try to see where I want to go during the event rather than betting him. But the thing I like most about Hovland is when we look at him, the biggest concern always is the around the green game. How is he going to handle that facet of his game? Here's the one difference here that why I think the Players Championship is a course and a venue that he can win at. There is so much undulation in these shaved runoffs where you have the potential that you can putt from off the surface. A lot of times, if you are wayward, like if you look at the 17th, the par 3, the iconic hole there, the island hole there, if you are wayward, you are in the water, more often than not. Like, you're going to be in the water there. So his ball striking and his approach play plays really well because either he is in the water with everybody else when he does go wayward. I trust the approach play that he's not going to go wayward as often as other players are. And when he does find himself in a situation to where he experiences one of those shaved runoffs where the ball runs off the surface, he can now try to putt from off the surface rather than chip. Now, we can make the argument that some of the stuff in the sand could be a problem. I think that's always an issue. Yeah, I mean, that's always an issue with him. But the hope with it is that he finds himself enough times in one of those shaved runoff areas to where he can putt. And, I think this course, I was talking to Jason about this the other day. I think it's going to be easier than people expect it to be. Like, I'm anticipating 16 under or greater wins this tournament. If that's the case, it's going to be these ball strikers with their irons that can find success. And maybe you could make the same argument about Morikawa, but for whatever reason, I'm out on Morikawa and in on Hovland in that spot there.
Yeah, and it's not that this course has never seen those types of scoring either. You had Rory, who I believe was 16 under when he won in 2019, and then you have Webb Simpson, who won in the year prior, I believe, at 18 under. So it's not that it's not a possible. I think everyone's very scared of this course. It feels like it's just that it's this unpredictable course that chalk goes to die. It's so volatile. And I agree with you on that. Like, maybe it won't be as volatile as everyone seems so scared of this course right now. But let's see another name on there that keeps coming up. We talked about Tom Hoge, but this one is, and I wonder if the reason why is because we saw a lot of guys last year that were at the top of the leaderboard. They went to Live. One of the guys that was at the top of the leaderboard that did not go to Live is Keegan Bradley. Keegan Bradley right now is starting to fall into this like darling space where it seems like he's on every single person's card. He's 45-1 right now. Where are you with Keegan Bradley?
It's one of those spots to where I would have preferred this number when it first opened versus the numbers that we see right now. Like a 45-1 Keegan Bradley. And it kind of goes back to the point that you just said where this is chalk goes to die. One of the reasons why this is where chalk goes to die above anything else, we can talk about weather, we can talk about all that. It's the water. Florida is so unforgiving every Florida course. Like you hit it into the water, all of a sudden you are just out of the tournament if you make that mistake that you cannot make. And all of a sudden there's triple bogeys and quadruple bogeys. And, all these courses have more double bogeys that come into play than any venue. So it always worries me from a DFS perspective, specifically a guy like Keegan Bradley, who is mid $7,000 chalk. That's usually not where I want to buy up for my chalk. Like if I'm going to play chalky players, give me the players that are the ones that are the John Rahms, the Rory McIlroys, the Scotty Schefflers, the ones to where their win equity is so high that they're going to go out, and I would rather take my chances with them. I made this argument on a show yesterday that the $7,000 range is so much more advanced because of like the top of the board being as strong as it is. So you get players like Keegan Bradley, Corey Connors, even Jason Day at 8,000. These are golfers that could be $10,000 in weaker fields. So I don't think they're your prototypical, bad chalk in the $7,000 range, but there is something to be said about there's volatility for this tournament. And a lot of times when we look from a DFS perspective, I see 17% on Keegan, which puts him the 10th overall person in ownership for me. A lot of times when you go with Keegan as your first play, you kind of run yourself into that trap where your lineup starts looking very similar to everybody else, because at the top, you really can't differentiate yourself that much from the rest of the field. So I guess I'm out in DFS because of that reason. My model likes him. It's solely an ownership leverage play. And then for betting, he's unfortunately just a little too low for my liking. Now, my numbers like him. That's kind of, once again, going against my model and just solely trying to leverage this from an ownership standpoint, because I do think he has been relatively safe here compared to everybody else. Like he is making cuts and giving good finishes every year.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that one. I think, and someone asked us, Keegan, Day, or Kirk in order. I think the two of us have made it pretty clear that we're pretty high on Day. And I think for me, like Day, it's Day, and then there's kind of a level break for me as far as these guys go. Christian Kirk, I think he's someone where I understand why people are in on him. I don't feel very strongly between him and Keegan. I don't know if you have a difference, how you feel.
I would rank it Day, Kirk, Keegan. Yeah. I think there is a big tier break between them also. To me, Day is a golfer that is a top 8 to 10 win equity guy in this field. Yeah. I think Kirk and Bradley are more of that like 15 to 20 range, that they're both steady golfers. They both have played well in Florida. I mean, from a metric standpoint, you have to like what you see. One of the plays that would intrigue me if you're trying to get exposure to Chris Kirk, I saw him in a round one bet against Sahith Theegala. Chris Kirk was plus 110 there. And kind of my reasoning is, and I explained this in my article over at Rotoballer. So I'll try to condense this as much as I can. But it's one of those spots to where my numbers think Kirk is about 55% to beat Theegala. A little bit better than a coin flip. But at plus 110, it's giving us a situation to where, it's a, 47-ish% thing. So we have about an 8% win implied probability edge in that spot. It's a number grab above anything else. It's not one of my patented situations to where I usually try to find players that I super want to fade. I am more out on Theegala than the rest of the public seems to be, just because of the water that comes into play. I think it can run him into some trouble, even though it didn't last week. But it's a number grab with Kirk. I kind of believe the market is a little bit lower than they should be on him, and maybe a little bit higher than on Theegala in that spot.
Okay, so that makes me, and this is something I wanted to ask you too, like if you had to name like one golfer that is just being overhyped right now, who is that golfer?
I'll tell you from my model perspective of like who's the...
See, this is why we're the perfect pair. It's just you are the numbers guy. I am not the numbers guy.
I would probably go with Colin Morikawa. Okay. I mean, I know that he's gotten some traction here recently, but like on DFS, he's 17% owned. I have him outside the top 30 of my model, which I am lower on Morikawa every single week. Like, I want to preface it with that he has gone out and won major championship events, and I have been full fade on him. So he's the guy who burns me more than anybody else. But I would probably say him, and then I guess, I mean, people aren't going to love to hear this, but if we're going for a player that I think is actually a person that you can try to oppose in head-to-head matchups, it would be Ricky Fowler for me.
Yes.
I think the buzz on Ricky has gotten a little bit out of control at this point. And it's one of those situations to where Jason Day statistically is back. Like, it shows with the stats. Ricky Fowler is in this weird spot to where he is better than he was. I don't know if I fully trust him with all the popularity that is coming his way and the volatility that I kind of expect from him. And that's not to say that he's going to miss the cut necessarily, but like, if we're looking at a head-to-head matchup, a Keith Mitchell against him, I would so much rather have Keith Mitchell than have Ricky Fowler. So I think there's different spots that we can like maneuver in and out of this.
I think that Ricky Fowler is the player. It's just like a nostalgic thing where you want Ricky to be back, but Ricky, like you said, like it's very obvious that Jason Day is back. He's every like facet of his entire game has just been more consistent. It's not what we've seen from him for a very long time. He had injuries and whatnot, but this is the perfect course for me for Ricky to absolutely go off the ledge. And it's like into the water and a couple times and he's out of there sort of thing.
My model doesn't necessarily think that's an impossible scenario that comes into play. Like, it hasn't projected to make the cut, but when we're looking at the likelihood of somebody imploding, I mean, he is as likely as almost any single player that, let's say, is 60-1 or less to just do that exact same thing that you talked about, to where he all of a sudden makes a 10 on a hole and he's out of the tournament. And it's the same answer I would give for Spieth. It's the same answer I gave for Theegala. These are golfers where, like, yeah, they have a little bit of upside to them, but the bust nature that comes into play is extremely scary when we're talking about anything to do with safety, whether that be cash game plays, matchup bets, placement wagers. Like, there's just too much volatility for me to feel comfortable. It doesn't mean that they can't provide a top 10 finish. It's just going to be more of that downside that I don't want to take on.
Yeah, he's someone where, for me, like, the risk is not necessarily worth the reward for me. I'd rather find someone that feels safer to me. Ricky is not safe at this point. He might get there. I don't know that I see that like happening, but this is interesting. And the thing about me is I'm always going to take bets like this. So will there be a hole in one on 17? I'm always going to bet this. Anytime you give me a boost, I'm the sucker. I'm the reason why they make these ads. It's for people like me. So I am always going to say yes to stuff like this. Let's make it fun. That feeling is electric anytime that happens. And it just makes watching these so much fun.
This is where you and I will be different in ways. I will always say no. I'll always say no in these spots because I do think that when they post the odds, it's never accurate of where it should be. Sure, it adds a lot of fun to the equation. Yeah. And I'm going to say, like, if it's going to happen, it's going to have to happen on probably I don't know. It's probably not going to happen on Friday just because of the wind. So it would probably have to be more likely to happen Thursday, Saturday, or Sunday. Obviously, Sunday adds some pressure that comes into play. Maybe Saturday is that ideal day to where if they put the pin just perfect of where it needs to be, that they try to get people to make a run up the leaderboard. Like, Saturday might be the most likely day. If you were to power rank or give me a specific day to have it happen, which is not a wager, I would pick Saturday, but I'm going to always say no in these spots.
Okay, fair. But you guys will see this is the difference. Like, I'm going to fall for all the boosts. I'm the sucker. Like, I tweet all the time that my weekends start on Thursdays. That's when golf starts. And you will find me watching golf, and probably, not that I should be saying this on my employer's channel here, but you will probably find me neglecting my work and focusing in on golf as much as possible, taking my calls with the TV on. So I like to add as much fun to it as possible. There's other ways to do this. I don't play as much DFS as you do either. So maybe if I did that, I could get over all these like little boosts I have to take to like keep the thrill going. But as far as favorite outrights, like if you had to do outside of Jason Day, because I think we both agree that we like Jason Day. But if you had to pick one favorite outright, two favorite outrights, where are you leaning this week?
I think if you're ignoring odds, which is more of that let's have fun factor to it.
Yeah.
Cool. I would say Patrick Cantlay would be the name that if you were to tell me pick one player who's going to win the tournament, I would say Patrick Cantlay. If you're saying something that is still bettable on the board that is useful and actionable for everybody, I still think the number on Siwoo Kim, I mean, that's a long shot. I understand that, but I still think that the number on him is doable, and anything over 50-1 is value for me.
Yeah, he's on my season-long team, so I would love for him to have some success. I've been a little bit quiet lately, so I will also take a Scheffler win if possible. Scheffler's probably my guy this week. He's going to be my guy every week. Like I said, I know we differ in this. Like outside a day, I still like Homa. I'm probably still going to be betting him consistently until he starts falling off a little bit. As far as a dark horse, is there someone that you have your eye on?
I mean, this is getting really sloppy.
I have a really gross one. I have a disgusting one, so don't worry. It's not pretty.
I mean, if we're going like maybe not to win the tournament and we're just saying like who is a player who can make the cut and maybe give you a top 20 or 40 finish, I'm going to go with Nate Lashley. I like his proximity numbers for this week. I think he kind of has that same thing as we would talk about with Victor Hovland, to where his 3-putt avoidance is really good. The around the green game is not. You can tell me that he can putt from off the surface. That might be a player that can make a run up the leaderboard. For saying somebody that has an outside chance to actually win this tournament, I mean, this is gross. This is a player that has missed back-to-back cuts. His form looks like it's gone south here recently, but I grabbed Brian Harman at 175-1. His ability to perform on fast greens and Pete Dye layouts is why he's yielded 2 top 10s here in his past 3 years. I don't know what to expect from him from a floor standpoint. Like, he's going to be volatile, but I did bet him to come top 40. I did bet the outright on him, and I have a lot of top 40 bets that, I mean, if we want to talk about some of those in a second, but Harman is at least a name to where I think the winning upside is better than the general public believes it is. Like, if we look at this, let's just say at the beginning of the year when he was in form like he was, he's probably, I don't know, 80-1 in this field, 70-1 in this field, maybe somewhere between that 60-100 range. So we're getting a price that has definitely been boosted because of what he has provided recently. And you kind of mentioned it a bunch of times. If this is not the venue where distance is the be all end all here, you know, Harman's accuracy should be able to come into play. And the short game is always intriguing to me.
Right. And accuracy is going to be one of those factors that, you know, that's how you're going to win at a tournament like this. Let's get into some of those positional ones, because I'm interested to hear some of those that you have. I can start with one of mine that another name not really hearing a lot about, Sungjae Im, top 30, the plus 100. I like the plus money on him. I think that, you know, he has 2 top 6 finishes in his 5 starts this season. He's great off the tee and around the greens with his wedges, and he's just coming in pretty good form. So another guy that I think a top 30 finish, like, will I be shocked if Sungjae Im finishes top 30? No, I will not. So he's someone that that was kind of a quick click for me as well. One of my earlier bets for this tournament.
I'm going to take it a step further. I would not be shocked if Sungjae Im won this golf tournament. I think you can throw him in. I think you can throw him into that mix of guys like Justin Thomas and Jason Day and all those players, where Sungjae, for me, when I run a model, is always one of the most underrated players. For whatever reason, I don't know why they don't want to bet him. They don't want to back him in DFS. He's always under the radar with it. But I run things, for an example, I'll try to simplify this also. So I run things from a 2-year regression model standpoint. So it'll take all the numbers that I run and it'll look over it. Obviously, as the year takes place of 2023, more of the 2023 stats come into the mix. When you start the year, it's 100% 2022. And obviously, like, I build it that way. That's my way of doing things with it. I also then go through and I run a weighted standpoint of it. So that would be like, let's take the weighted tee to green, or just tee to green in general, and try to explain it like that. So if I took tee to green from a 2-year perspective, that would run it from all the courses that we're looking at on the entire PGA Tour. When I run it from a weighted perspective, that would be weighting towards TPC Sawgrass only. So I think that that's an important way to run a model, because tee to green in a nutshell, or any statistic in a nutshell, does not matter, because par 5 scoring may be extremely important at one venue and then not important at all at another venue. So I always try to mimic a course-specific layout of how I run this. When I ran this for Sungjae Im from a weighted tee to green perspective, he jumped inside the top 5 of my model in expectation. And the same things come into play when we look at just short par 72 courses. He was 5th there. And then all of the weighted scoring that we've run for this, he's 5th in my model there. So I think we have a golfer that is very realistically a top 5 to 7 player in this event. And he's being treated as a golfer that's outside of the top 10. So, I think a top 30 bet makes sense. If you want to push it even a little bit further into a top 20 or a top 10, there's a lot of ways to bet it with him. But it's one of those spots where the market consistently is undervaluing what Sungjae brings to the table.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the guys around, like where his odds are at right now, like 35-1 for Sungjae Im is still like very good odds, especially if you compare it to the guys that are around him in that area. So I think you might have convinced me to add a little bit more Im to my card, which is a problem because we're supposed to be stopping at this point and being a little bit responsible, but that is probably not going to happen. What's one of your positional bets that you made so far?
So I guess let's play this as a smash or pass. I'll give you the bet that I have, and you can tell me if you would smash it or pass it.
Okay.
So I took JT Poston at plus 175 to come top 40.
I would smash that.
Brendan Todd plus 225 to come. These are all top 40. I won't say it every single time. This is okay. Top 40.
Probably pass, but he's someone that I do find myself, like I will preface it with like he is someone that I consistently am passing on. So might be a little bit of bias on my part there.
I guess when you give a pass, I will give an answer of why I back them on it. Cool. So the reason why I did with Todd is when we look, and it's kind of the same thing that we were talking about with Jason Day, to keep going back to him over and over again. But when we look at the 2023 statistics, obviously markets have now respected what Jason Day has done. Like they've moved him into being sub 40-1 in any single board. I mean, this was a golfer that was 100-1 plus. I don't think that same movement has taken place with Brendan Todd at this point. And it's not the same output that we're getting. But when I ran this only from a 2023 perspective, Brendan Todd was the 19th ranked player in my model, which if you put that into comparison, he's 41st from running this from a 2-year perspective. And I always think positional golf courses where his accuracy can come into play. He's a great scrambler. He's top 10 in my model. So I'm going to bet on that upside that he can bring to the table there and bet on the 2023 stats.
I like it. Okay. See, this is the problem. This is going to be the problem about doing this show on Wednesday is we're going to be talking and then I'm going to get off and I'm going to add a bunch of stuff to my card. So I don't know that you're helping my gambling addiction.
Hey, gambling's all about having fun with this at the end of the day too. I mean, bankroll management, only gamble what you can gamble. We don't want anybody being irresponsible with it, but
never.
It kind of goes back to what you're saying with it. We want, like, it's meant to be fun. Sure, we want to win money and sure we want to grow our bankroll. And that's always like the most important thing to me, but there's also the fun factor that needs to come into play with it to where you are betting bets and you're having fun when you're doing it, because like I do it for my profession, but a lot of people are doing it to, it's no different. I had somebody explain this to me one time, which it was such a different viewpoint that I ever saw it as, people go to the movies, people go to shows and they spend, 2 hours of their time and they're entertained. You get golf of 4 days of entertainment for your money on it. So, I mean, that's a different way to look at it that I never viewed for the first 10 years of me gambling. And then I was like, oh, that's a good point with it. This is an entertainment thing for a lot of people.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. I'm with you on that. Do you have another? I have one that I want to run past you when you are done. But
I'll just do, we'll rotate here. I'll just do one more and then you can give me one and then I'll close it out with one. We won't go through all 10 of these. We'll be here all day, but
yeah, we will.
Adam Hadwin plus 160.
Smash for that one. Yes, I would be interested in Hadwin.
Perfect. Give me yours then.
Okay. So this is a top 20. Adam Scott plus 400.
I like it. I think Scott is another golfer to where he doesn't get the credit that he deserves. And I don't know if it's an age factor with him at this point that we don't think that this is what he is currently, but like from a metric standpoint. So I keep going back to this example and I think it's a really good point to make with Adam Scott here. So when I ran this from a 2-year perspective, he is 14th overall. When I ran this from a 2023 only standpoint, he is 20th overall. I mean, sure, he's regressed a little bit based off of that, but we're still talking about a golfer that is, a fringe top 20 player for a course like this. I'm not saying he's a top 20 player in the world, but specifically for a course that demands ball striking and players that are going to be able to use their total driving and the precision with their irons and all of those factors that come into play. I think Scott is an intriguing bet. And we've seen it historically from him, even from a course history standpoint here. Like, everybody wants to talk about Keegan Bradley. Look at the course history he has here. Look at what he's done. Hey, Adam Scott for a 3-year run from 2019 to 2017, 12th, 11th, 6th.
Yeah, you look at his history here and I get, and that's been the big thing. You don't really need to rely on course history. I get it. But, he also won here in 04.
Sure.
I think he finished worse than 48th once since 2012. I could be mistaken. I think that the number is somewhere near that. And that was last year. And that's when the conditions were brutal. But you want to talk about a player that he plays pretty consistently at a course like this. His skills match up very well here. He's had several top 20s here. I really like Adam Scott. Am I there to say Adam Scott is going to win this? No, I'm not. But I think a top 20 is within range for him, and at plus 400, so really nice odds.
I think even a step further than that, he is an intriguing DFS play for all those reasons that you just mentioned.
Yes, I love this one. First tour pick, Svensson top 40 gets home. I actually do like that one. That's one that I would smash as well. Do you have one more for me?
Yeah, I would agree with the Svensson. I don't have a wager on him, but I have no reasons to not want to bet that. Like, he's positive leverage in all portions of my model, and I would tend to agree that he will come to top 40. Yeah, I will give you one more. Let's go with, I'll try to make this a fun one. KH Lee at 175.
I will smash that as well. That's more of a gut thing, so I'll let you explain why. But I think KH Lee is someone that I've always been high on. He's also on my season-long team. So I think, again, like, he's someone that any given Sunday, this is not out of his realm 40 position.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to, so like if you look a year ago, which I give credit to my partner of Better Golf, Nick Bretwish, for this. He called, or maybe 2 years ago at this point, he called KH Lee TPC Lee, that every single time that you get a TPC property with him, he seems to find success. And I have never been the biggest believer of that being the case here. And then all of a sudden, when you started looking at the statistics and how things played out, he was proven correct with it. And that kind of caught a lot of buzz in the space there for a really long time. And for whatever reason this week, we have lost that narrative entirely, that this is a very good course setup for him. He's not necessarily going to grade as somebody who's going to break your model. He's 38th overall for me. But one of the big intriguing portions of where I'm going with this is from an upside perspective in 2023, and we don't need upside. We just need a top 40 for him. But I like that the stats are trending in the right direction. He is 18th overall for me. That's a really big jump. Kind of as I alluded to at the beginning of the show, I don't really experience that many massive jumps in my model. And that's in a vacuum situation. I'm using that like from a short duration of time. That's the important part. That's where you're going to get more of these outlier type picks that are kind of a little bit more aggressive in different facets of which way I want to move it there. But I believe this is a good venue for KH Lee. And even from a DFS perspective, I see 2% ownership right now. Like, I don't think that there's any reason to believe he couldn't give you a top 40 and above there.
Right. Absolutely. I'm with you on that. And oh my gosh, we've already been on almost an hour. So let's start like wrapping this up with, give me a player to fade, your one player to fade. And then we'll get into who's your daddy, one and done. And maybe we might need to make a head-to-head bet here as well on something. I'll think of something here, but why don't you give a player to fade?
Let's go with Ricky Fowler.
I'm going to ride that bus as well. I think, we talked about this. He's someone where I see this going in a direction. I think Hatton also comes to mind a little bit. I think especially with the hype, but again, talking about guys where I think that things could destruct very easily on a course like this, given all the water hazards. So I'm with you on that. Let's do one and done. Who's your daddy? Who's your dad this week? here? Let me know.
I think we should play this weekly to where we keep track of totals against each other and we can update it every single week.
Okay.
So I'm going to preface it with this. Probably the real pick that should be made is Patrick Cantlay. I cannot do a first show with you, Stephie, and not pick Jason Day as my one and done pick. So I am going to take Jason Day.
Gosh, and looking into the future here, I'm not going to use my Scheffler. I'm not going to use my Homa here. I think that we're going to go with Hovland as my one and done for this week. Just given the way that he is playing, and even him, he's another guy. Course history is still pretty good for a guy like this here. He played well last year. So I'll take Victor Hovland for this. And I think that's it. If we should do this, and we'll keep track of it until the end of the season and see who ends up winning. If Day wins, I'm going to be very upset that you grabbed him this week.
I mean, I assume at this point I already have whatever the first place prize is. Just give me the $4 million and we'll move on to next
Day.
week.
We are a pro Day podcast. That's not going to change from week to week. What will change is obviously, these graphics here. We'll get that worked out for the following week. I appreciate everyone tuning in. I appreciate you, Spencer. I'm really excited to see where this, as our chemistry grows, as the show grows, where we're able to take this.
I am very excited once again, Stephie. Thank you so much for teaming up with me on this. As I said, this is something that I have wanted to do for the longest time. And this is not something that was put together overnight here. We have been talking about this for a really long time of making sure that when we did it correctly. So thank you to everybody out there who listened to the show, everybody who's going to tune in later. The support of all of the people who listen to this podcast. I mean, we can't do it without you guys. So I really look forward to see where we can take this, Stephie.
Yeah, absolutely. And our goal is to bring something different, that maybe, this industry hasn't quite seen. And if you guys like what you listen to and you're excited to listen along, be sure to subscribe, hit the like button, maybe comment in the comment section who you think is going to win this week. If you think our day bets are a little bit crazy here. But we'll see you guys next week on Wednesday. I appreciate you all and good luck on your bets.